we ready?
Let's do this.
Thank you, Sara, for your interest. I'm excited to be here. And it is indeed an interesting time to be holding a global climate conversation. So I'll try and set some of the context and the tone under which we are gathered here. These United Nations climate negotiations have been going on the 29th iteration. So for quite some time, they've obviously progressed quite a lot from the first days in the 90s. And every year, countries come together, as well known, to really set new pledges, to raise the bar on what they're capable of doing in driving down emissions, pledging more support through money and technical capacity building for nations that are trying to move for clear energy technologies and bring down their climate pollution. So these are big events that really are a moment to bring the world together and often bring in voices that we don't hear in other forums and venues. So that's the importance. We are obviously gathered here just days after the election that has brought in the new leader who's really vowed to roll back some of the progress the United States made on reducing its own emissions. The U.S. is the world's largest polluter in history, now a second to China in current emission levels, but has a very large role to play in seeing the world make progress on curbing climate change. And so there are a lot of concerns about the U.S. role and how they will shape momentum on climate efforts going forward. I think people are really looking to these talks to see how the world reacts and tries to keep that momentum going. So I would love to hear from our panelists just initially. First of all, I would like you to introduce yourselves, maybe highlight some of the experience you bring to this conversation. And then I'm going to kick off in just a simple question. Were you surprised by the outcome of the US election? You want to go ahead and start?
Yeah, sure, I'll jump in first. So, hi everyone, my name is Charlie. I'm here at COP with the Youth Negotiators Academy. So my day-to-day job is that I'm a climate change and carbon markets lawyer. And then on the side, I volunteer with the Youth Negotiators Academy. And our mission is to train young people to negotiate under the UNFCCC at COP. Our mission is about intergenerational justice. We notice that there's a big gap of young people in this space, despite the fact that young people will ultimately suffer the greatest consequences of the climate crisis, young people in future generations. So I'm proud to say that we have over 100 of our negotiators here at COP in the negotiating rooms. 53 are fully funded by us. And we're expanding year on year to change the landscape of who is actually negotiating at the UNFCCC, capacity building for some of the poorest nations, and trying to level the field, not just in age, but also in regional representation and other ways too. Shall I jump in terms of my reaction to the election? Yeah. Sure. So I think I would say, well, I'm working in Australia at the moment, so I was able to watch it come in during my working day. And I would say I was surprised. I really did think that Kamala Harris was going to get it, even though it was showing up very close in the days and weeks leading up to the election. But also, I would say when it happened, it wasn't real shock. It was kind of almost like, yeah, I guess that makes sense, And hindsight is obviously 2020. But I think to some degree, a lot of the structural issues in terms of what people are voting for and why they're voting have not really changed since Trump was elected last time. And it was close even then again in 2020. And I think my overarching reaction was probably just sadness, actually. It's quite depressing what it means for a lot of different policy areas, not just climate, where I'm most focused, but also, the state of democracy, abortion rights, etc. But no, I wouldn't say I was completely surprised, even though I didn't think it was going to go that way. But anyway, I'll pass over because we'll get into some of these things more later.
Indeed. Rich?
Yeah, hi, my name's Rich Wilson. I'm still a bit of a climate policy person. I used to work for IPCC a long time ago, but I tend to specialise on building climate assemblies, and we're launching with the Brazilian government a major permanent citizens assembly for COP30, so I'm here as part of that. And I think, who here was surprised last week Who was surprised, honestly? Who wasn't surprised by the Trump victory? So yes, a slight majority in favour of the not surprised. I mean, I was convinced Trump was going to win until about a week beforehand. I was really like drinking all the kind of podcasts and you know, I think I was just drinking the Kool-Aid that I wanted Kamala to win. But I think the thing that really hit me when I woke up in the morning, it felt just like 2016, you know, Trump, Brexit, that kind of thing. But it felt like people like me, I'm a member basically of the progressive establishment. That's just who I am. You know, if you don't like me, that's fine. We just haven't learned the lessons. Like I'm from North Wales, from an industrial background in the UK. All my family vote what you might call Trump equivalent people these days. And they're my family, they're my friends. And yet even it hasn't landed sufficiently deep in my DNA of how we need to stop this problematization of basically my friends and family who are part of that movement, of the Trump, Brexit, New Right, whatever it is movement. I think until we actually realize that they are our friends and they are our family and they are our people in our countries and the transition has to not just work for them, but they have to almost be like leading it because it has to be like in their interests, then, you know, so I'm really hoping that we can really learn that lesson seriously this time and not just dress it up. And I think, you know, all of the, and I've done it myself, but this whole languaging of like calling people you don't agree with something like, I don't want to use the word Nazi, but that kind of stuff got you fascists. It's got to stop, guys. People like me, and I have done that type of thing, not quite like him, it's got to stop because that's just solidifying the polarity upon which a just transition just can't be delivered.
Hi everyone, my name is Max. I guess I'm a YouTuber. I make videos online, mostly educational videos. And climate is not my main area of expertise, but I've been making some videos about climate. Actually, how many people here watched my videos? Barrett, let's go. This is the little fan club there. Thank you guys. Yeah, this is a humbling experience. Can you also raise your hand if you're American? All right, thank you guys very much. Yeah, I just want to say that I'm from Ukraine originally, and we were actually the first to elect a convicted felon in 2010. So you guys are not the first ones. You know, we did it before it became mainstream. Yeah, not surprised.
Okay. So one of the pledges, or one of the sort of promises that Trump made on the campaign trail was to withdraw the U.S. from the Paris Agreement. It would not be the first time he did so when he was first president. However, the Biden administration remains in office for 2 more months, and they do have representatives here at negotiations. I'm interested in knowing, you know, what you sort of see the role of the U.S. playing in these talks, and perhaps how much stock we should put into that position, and maybe how other countries should be trying to step up and take some leadership roles.
Well, sure. So, I mean, one of the really terrible things, obviously, about the U.S. Political system is it's so inert to change. And maybe one of the good things sometimes is that it is inert to change. So, and I think, has anyone ever read the UN Foundation report on the value of climate cooperation? Has anyone ever read that? It's not very popular. Honestly, download it, it's amazing. It talks about how climate negotiations consist of kind of informal and formal components, and how the vast majority of the really critical work in the last couple of decades has been informal stuff. So people might leave the Biden administration, we would expect that, but they will go to other places. And things will still happen. And I think also what's particularly important to be aware of in terms of the states is, of course, the power of the states. Like, you know, it isn't like a country like Azerbaijan or the UK or whatever else. The states have extraordinary power. And whether you look at New York or Chicago or LA, places that are, you know, launching, you know, climate assemblies to really try and lead on the transition and address transition. And I think, just as we've seen in the States, this incredibly diverse patchwork around abortion, around legalization of marijuana, my hope is that we're going to see this real leadership from those people who want to, in the face of Trump, almost as like a kind of reaction to Trump, say we are still going to do things because we can. So absolutely, it's a moment of deep reflection. But because of the nature of the states as an actor, whereby many of the states are bigger than countries or many of the other countries in the world, so I think it's such a mixed bag. We can't really see it in the same way that we might say France, for example.
That's a great point. I'd be curious, well, to have you answer the question first of all, but also just maybe bring in some of the perspective of the youth delegates that you.
Yeah, for sure. So we have a very international cohort at the Youth Negotiators Academy, and this has been a point of conversation, for sure. And I think your question is particularly interesting because to the extent that the Biden delegation here should still engage meaningfully and look to be ambitious, is really about the extent to which the US is the leader in climate ambition and momentum, right? Because if they're going to agree something very ambitious and then Trump comes out of the Paris Agreement and potentially even the UNFCCC, that's being discussed as well, which would be disastrous because God knows when the US will come back in, because I think you would need a supermajority in the Senate, right, to come back under the UNFCCC. But anyway, and I think that question of where the sort of global climate ambition is the important one that comes out of this thinking about the Biden delegation now. And my thinking is also very aligned with the point that you made, Rich, about where that climate ambition will go. And we've seen a Trump presidency before, we've seen the US pull out of the Paris Agreement, and it really did fall to non-state actors. We're talking about the states, like you say. Even at this election, we saw a few climate issues on the ballot, like in California, where they had their climate fund that passed, and elsewhere, that we can expect them to really take the lead in very ambitious ways. We also have cities, like initiatives like C40, which are cities which have committed to cut their emissions in half by 2030, really taking the lead again. And also corporates. Many of them have already invested in a really big way in the climate shift, and especially because most of the big corporates, most of the mass emitters, are operating across multiple jurisdictions. And it's still the case that other countries are still being ambitious in their climate proposals. Taking one thing like climate-related financial disclosure, which a lot of countries have implemented over the past couple of years, in, for example, Australia, Japan, Singapore, Brazil. If you're an Australian, a US entity, that has supply chains in each of those jurisdictions, you still have to be thinking about the climate. You still have to be thinking about your policies, your emissions, all of these things, because you're still going to be reporting it elsewhere. So I think there's not a complete loss of hope, and there is still this sort of climate ambition. And then even looking to other states, I mean, this was a year of elections in which we saw some real climate wins. Like in Mexico, we had Claudia Sheinbaum, who has a background in the IPCC. She's a climate scientist. Also elsewhere in the UK, we saw, they're not really climate heroes, but they're better than the Conservatives were. And a lot of these other countries have really invested in the climate shift already. Like China, for example, again, not a massive climate hero, but has really invested in renewable energy generation, especially in their factories, like producing electric vehicles, solar panels, etc. And they are to invest in now for the US pulling out of the Paris Agreement and the UNFCCC to kind of slow down their own momentum in that way. So there might be a bit of a rethinking in terms of who is leading on the climate push, but the direction of travel is really inevitable at this point. And I think that momentum will continue growing, and I don't think we should get too down about it, despite some of the headlines.
Max, do you want to share some thoughts about sort of the U.S. role in climate momentum, and maybe who else can step into?
Yeah, I think one interesting thing I'm seeing online, and you guys are way smarter than me when it comes to climate and probably most other things. One thing that is kind of funny about the online world, this social media world, is that people are very quick to divide others into winners and losers. And for some reason, after the election, I'm seeing this narrative that somehow we lost. And it's because we lost, it's not like climate change is not happening. It's still happening. But I think somehow there is this narrative of okay, Trump is back, so I guess climate change is not an issue anymore, but it is. So for me, what I really struggle with online is when I make videos about climate, it's mostly about people working in climate solutions, or informative videos about kind of what's going on, who are the biggest emitters, what are the best solutions, what are the cleanest energy sources, this kind of stuff. And I'm not a scientist, so I have a real issue with my audience and my viewers just not agreeing with very basic science that I thought was kind of done and decided, and we know this. So for me, as a creator, I think that potentially the new old leader of the U.S. is fueling some of this science denial that as a creator I don't really know what I'm going to do with, because I'm not a scientist. It's for someone else to figure out how to re-explain these things. And I think Trump's victory kind of fuels this momentum of like, this was all wrong, even though obviously science doesn't care about the 20,000 people in Pennsylvania and what they think.
It's a really good point, and it raises sort of the final question I wanted to ask all of you, and then I'm eager to open it up to the audience and hear what all of you are thinking. But often Americans don't hear the perspective of people outside of the United States. And so at a time when we are here for a global conversation about something that will affect everyone, including Americans, as climate impacts grow more severe, what would you say to people in the United States at this time? Why are you here? Why is this an important conversation to be having?
Can I, as an answer to that question, can I ask the room a question? But it is an answer to the question, I promise you. Can I ask, so I'm going to ask people what they think were what were the top issues of why people voted what they voted for. So I'm going to ask you to choose between the economy, abortion, immigration, foreign policy, and democracy. Okay, did you hear those? It was like foreign policy, economy, abortion, immigration, and democracy. Okay, who thought the economy was like the top issue? Okay, who thought immigration was the top issue? Who thought abortion was the top issue? Who thought foreign policy was the top issue? And who thought democracy was the top issue? Democracy was by far the top issue. 34% on democracy, 31% on the economy, 14% immigration, 14% abortion and 11% immigration, and just 4% on foreign policy. And this gives me real hope about America, because they're right. Our climate crisis is symptomatic of our political crisis. We have democratic and governance institutions which are just out of date, that just needs to be changed. And America has been the hotbed of leading this. It took 1 century in the States for universal suffrage to get realized. It took a long time. And for the last 40 years, I know, because I got trained in the early noughties by an organization called America Speaks on new citizen deliberation and organization techniques. And they used those techniques called to look at how they're going to replace the Twin Towers, response to Hurricane Katrina, many, many other things. These were incredible ways of putting people in charge of major decisions. And again, I think what we're going to see in the States with that incredible recognition and knowing that it is our political system that is broken, that they can hopefully lead the way and support the rest of us come up with these United States of democratic innovation that give us hope and ideas of what we can do wherever we are.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that? In terms of the interest in democracy, see, I hear that and I worry that when people say democracy was the leading issue, that's people thinking democracy was being stolen because of lies that Trump was saying, or that there was election fraud, etc. And I think if that is the case, there's sort of a bifurcation which is happening here, in that the point you're making about people being engaged in democracy and wanting to improve it, which is actually, I suppose, separate from people thinking that the way that the election is currently being undertaken is very different from what is in the reality, and being lost in like social media echo chambers, like the point you made, Max. So I suppose the point I'm making is I'm wondering whether the data does reflect the point you're making, that people are really engaged in democracy. What I felt I learned from the US election was that this was the first election since the attempted coup in 2021, and I felt that there's a real disengagement from democratic norms, right? That people actually weren't that fussed that Trump tried to steal the election because they have voted him in again. So I just wonder your response to that.
A super quick response. I recommend a book by Bill Moyer, another phenomenal American theorist, now dead, on movement theory. And he's looked at movements like smoking, nuclear, abortion, etc., and looked at how they work as a change process. I think there's a really interesting interaction between the climate movement as symptomatic of broken politics and the need for democratic alternatives. we've got over, in most countries around the world now, we've got over 90% demand for some kind of political systems change. Now, it's both a real moment of opportunity to innovate politics and huge jeopardy because the right wing can come in response. So it's absolutely both. And one of the challenges we have at the moment, I would say, is that our movement alternatives, i.e. what we do to fix democracy, there's very little agreement around it. There are things like climate assemblies, there are things like what Brazil are doing to overcome fake news and other important projects that that we're speaking to. But actually, there is a moment of jeopardy whereby if we can't agree movement alternatives to fix democracy over the next kind of, let's say, 10 to 15 years, we could be in even worse trouble. So I think you're kind of right and kind of wrong all at once.
I'll take it.
I'm going to jump in really quickly because I think this conversation raises the point that climate wasn't a top issue in the election, in the U.S. election.
Yeah.
And yet, here we are, still having this meeting which highlights the importance of addressing climate change. What does it say to you that it wasn't a top agenda item, that it often isn't? It hasn't been in global elections we've seen throughout the year. Should this be more of a conversation? How do we integrate this into our political systems? Because so much of what I'm hearing from people responding to concerns over leadership is, it's a new era. This is a market-driven process. If you're not invested in clean energy transition, you're losing out. And yet, the politics do matter, right? The regulations, the legislation, the Inflation Reduction Act, the U.S. climate law has really provided the momentum the U.S. needs to be shifting. So, why isn't it part of the conversation?
A super quick response, but immigration's a big issue, health's a big issue, the economy's a big issue. They're all climate issues. They're all fundamentally being driven by climate, very, very obviously. So I think often climate is the horizontal driver that doesn't get the column inches because people have decided, within newsrooms, maybe that climate isn't, going to sell or work as good clickbait. But it absolutely is a driver of those issues that are the top issues, in my opinion.
Yes, I completely agree with that. And I think the sort of way in which we talk about climate in elections is so interesting. And I think it's something that's not happening just in the US, but it's happening around the world, that you have sort of two views on climate, and one can be, summarized very easily, as Trump did in his drill baby drill, which is basically, no, we're not going to get on board with this whole climate nonsense. And then the other is the pro-climate argument, which is not just one argument, but it's actually a bunch of arguments about clean energy, about jobs, about healthcare and clean air, and all of these different things. And the message gets kind of lost; it gets fuzzled out amongst all of those. And there's also, I think, amongst the pro-climate groups, a lot of technical jargon, which makes it hard to break through to the electorate. And I think the pro-climate, if I can say that, pro-climate sides have to really reflect on how they're actually communicating this message to the electorate. Because looking at what Biden's done, I mean, he's had a historic administration in terms of legislation like the IRA, which has been very, very effective and powerful at channeling money towards things like electric vehicles, clean energy, all of these things, often in red states. And yet that message didn't get through to voters that it was really benefiting them, all of this climate stuff. But I think also there's more systemic issues to reflect on in terms of how climate is discussed. I think one is the social media point, which again, I spend a lot of time thinking about how people are in their echo chambers and how we get through to them. And I don't really know what the answer to that is. I think personally that we need to think about taking social media under some sort of public administration, recognizing the fact that it's probably the most common information channel now by which people get their news. And the fact that we leave it to, honestly, people like Elon Musk to administer is just completely insane. And it's just spiraling our society into polarization, divisiveness, violence, which is very, very concerning. But then also, really how we look about education. I think there are whole issues with how we teach not just climate education, but really citizenship values, democratic norms. That means that people are vulnerable to falling into echo chambers on social media, and perhaps when elections come around don't realize the value of all this climate stuff, and also the importance of democratic norms and things like that. There's really systemic issues of knowledge gaps, of people being able to prioritize these issues. And then, when you intersect that with social media, it just creates this perfect storm by which people, I think, come to vote without having, I mean, this is a really patronizing thing to say, and I don't mean it to sound patronizing, but come to vote without maybe full scope of all the issues and how they're affecting them. yeah, so it's just something to think about there in terms of how we talk about climate in elections.
I think this would be good for Max to respond to because you are on social media a lot and are working on engagement and education. And sorry, I'm actually going to have to run to an event that I have to cover, but then I'll let you guys take over some of the questions from the audience. So
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. It's difficult. It's really, I think, I don't know. I think there was an kind of an echo chamber problem, and I think for some reason I feel like the peak of it was like 4 years ago. I think right now it's almost like people are watching all kinds of things, they just don't believe it. So they see it. It's not like, because when you think about like algorithmic echo chambers, like you don't see the other side, right? But I think right now people do see it, but they just like deny it completely and almost like make fun of it. And then if you talk about, you mentioned Trump's slogan, "Drill baby drill," it's good. Like it's a good slogan, And then what's the alternative? Like what's the pro-climate alternative? Like a 10-page, whatever the UN, the brilliant report that you mentioned. Like I think we really need to find ways to get people excited. The way people are excited about drilling for some reason. Like what's so exciting about it? Like it's a pretty boring process, but it gets people going. And then when you talk about engagements on social, talk about engaging people on social media. If you look at the podcasting schedule of the Republicans versus the Democrats, it's like something like 24 versus 2. So then you talk about engaging young people who are on social media, and then you don't. Well, I asked them to come on my channel, and the Democrats didn't, and it's like Trump and his camp were going to all of the podcasts, all the time, all of the channels doing short videos, doing streams, all of these things, and then the Democrats were doing nothing on this front, and then they're like, oh my God, how can young people be voting? It's so obvious. It's just simple. If you want to engage people, you have to be in the space where they are. So yeah, I'm sure Politico is great. I'm sure that, the BBC, all of these organizations are great, but no one reads. That's kind of a problem.
So how long have we got for the session? Anyone? How long have we got for the session? 10 more minutes. So should we take like two banks of like 3 questions? Yeah, exactly. Do you need a mic?
No, I'm loud. I'm American.
Oh, perfect.
So I work in climate comms. I'm American. I live in Amsterdam. So I think I'm really interested in this communication thing we've been talking about, and the through line between climate and all the issues that you mentioned: British immigration, economy, all these things. What messages would you use to convey that to the American people, specifically the demographic groups that we've lost, like men and young people and people in lower socioeconomic bands? And then secondly, how do we combat hopelessness, especially in light of this election? Because I think a lot of Americans are feeling that, particularly on the left.
Great questions. Thank you so much. Should we take a couple more too? Anyone else?
You're not going to answer?
Well, I normally take banks of 3. That's all.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm also very but I really like your question. If you had something to say to Americans, what would you say? I feel like it wasn't just politically effective, and it's not. So if you had like a message, what would it be? Yeah.
Thank you. And a final one from anyone? Oh, sorry, thank you. Okay, yeah, great, sorry. Okay, great, thank you. So, is there any of those you'd like to take?
Am I live?
I'll send a message to the Americans.
I'll get a wrap up.
It's not your fault. No, I mean, I think, people vote all kinds of ways, and they have all kinds of reasons. I think we really misunderstand America, and I think it's just such a huge country. It's crazy. But you happen to be born in this country, or maybe even in a state that kind of like decides the future of the world low-key when you vote. But then again, you do vote according to your country's needs or your perceived needs, or to what you feel like is going to improve your life. So I think from us, it's like there was a bit of a view that like, how could they do this? How could they vote? I can't believe Americans are like that. But it's at the end of the day, it's everyone has their reasons for voting the way they have, and now we have 4 years of Trump government, and I think now it's just we have to figure out what to do in this setting, and just not kind of view people as necessarily evil or stupid, because I think sometimes we just kind of like this is such a but yeah, so message to the Americans: it's okay. It's okay, we get it. I think it's also a message for Europe to improve and step up that is needed, showing that, perhaps the Americans feel like they want to be kind of America first, and maybe they will become a more isolated country. Maybe that's what they want, and we just have to be prepared that maybe that's what they want. Maybe in 4 years we'll see that they don't want this, but I think we should be ready. And Americans are generally nice. You guys are nice, so it's all good.
Yeah, sure. So I suppose my answers are quite brief, really. I think, extending on what I was saying before, I think if you're going to have a climate message to your campaign, it has to be very straightforward. Like, I feel like if I was advising someone who was running for president, I don't even want to imagine me running for president myself. I think you'd have to have a message that was just like jobs, jobs, jobs. And you're just talking about jobs, talking about IRA jobs, CHIPS Act jobs, how, the green economy will create more jobs, how the, engaging in the energy climate transition will grow the economy. I mean, I'm not even really a growing the economy kind of person. I'm leaning more towards degrowth nowadays. But I think having a real simple message in terms of how, climate legislation and the just transition can really benefit people in their day-to-day lives. Because I just think that's getting so lost in a really concerning way. And then I think in terms of a message to Americans, I mean, that's so hard. It's such a diverse country, right? And you're speaking to hundreds of millions of people. But I think something that is important, not just in America, but really in every country around the world, and especially in, Western countries where we're seeing these sorts of issues really grow in this kind of way. I think really engaging with people where they're at. It's like, you were saying, Rich, in terms of talking to friends and family who are really feeling this way. I mean, I also have family members and friends who sympathize with what's going on, or what Trump is pushing in the US, or, the Brexit campaign, and all things with that. And I think really tackling polarization and divisiveness and certain specific views really require us on an individual level to engage with people and have these conversations in a really non-judgmental way. And I think one of the biggest problems with the left at the moment is just this kind of putting people in boxes and like cancel culture and all the rest of it. And it's just so unhelpful, because it might feel really good in that moment to like disengage from someone, and sometimes maybe you do have to do that, but like the shift towards doing that very generally. But then what happens is like Trump gets elected or Brexit happens, because loads and loads of people feel that way and hate feeling like they're stupid or an idiot for feeling that way, because they're concerned specifically about their community, their job, whatever. And I think if you're not meeting people where they're at on an individual level, being willing to engage, I think we're just going to get completely lost. So I don't know how helpful that is, but that's something I think about doing a lot anyway.
So just a very kind of quick response. So I'll kind of start with the Azerbaijan point and then kind of roll back a little bit. So I wrote a paper recently for the OECD called Good and Bad Democracy. And good democracy is one whereby we build solidarity, we empower people, we build mutual understanding. We've got truth as a foundational, so the engines for truth. So we've absolutely got to have much stronger regulation of the vehicles whereby truth is propagated. And so I've never done any work in Azerbaijan. I've done quite a lot of work in this neck of the woods, the Caucasus and Turkey. And what I would say is, it depends. So in different countries, you need to do different things. But what I have noticed in many countries around here is that things like powerful citizens' assemblies can be, and they're very popular in China, for example. can really be really helpful ways to help governments make tough decisions, provide the political ballast to make brave decisions. So that could be interesting. I don't know anything about democracy or the situation in Azerbaijan, so I don't answer that looking for more detail. But look at that document, that paper. And I think this. So I've got this feeling right now that climate and NDCs and all the technical stuff that we hear about in COP just aren't part of the problem. I watched a film a couple of weeks ago about water and how water, as a way of building empathy and solidarity between people, and actually as an alternative metric for understanding the crisis than carbon, is much more helpful for building solidarity and for building kind of groups along. And I just had this hunch that, I spent 10 years running democratic innovation projects, and following the previous Brexit Trump vote, I went to work on how do we build power in communities that are struggling. So I spent a few years doing that. And what we found is that the report I wrote called Good and Bad Health, that you can have a look at, which talks precisely about that point, combating hopelessness. And what we found was, with our public services, social care, schools, hospitals, they were about the way in which those relationships with people were about building people's self-efficacy, self-collective efficacy. And actually, if you want to build that, so one of the key things about thinking about democracy, because it's not about voting, it's about the whole system of schools, of education, of information, of media. Yes, voting can be part of it, absolutely as well. But unless you're seeing it in a broader way, I think one of the big problems I think in the States is just as the States has was a leader of spreading democracy around the world a century ago, it now needs to become a leader of reimagining a form of democracy that's going to enable us to meet the poly crisis in a fair and effective way. We don't know how to do that yet. Are we done? We're inside. I've taken over the chair in this role. Anyway, thanks very much.